BMC means building more companies. DC CEO busted by the Popos. Agent Microsoft reporting in. DOJ and AWS DDoS detection. Perplexing AI decisions. Sophos secures new works, and the latest news from the OCP Summit in this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown. Today is Wednesday, October 23rd, and we are still deep into Cybersecurity Month. I hope that you've checked all of the locks on your doors and you made sure that the windows are shut because it's also National Horror Movie Day. I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. John Schwartz. John, what is your favorite horror movie of all time?
You know, that's a really good question. I've seen so many, and I sometimes think of Alien as a horror movie, although it's a science fiction movie. So I would have to say for horror, I've got like 10 candidates, and I'm going to winnow it down. I have to say that I saw the original Halloween when I was 17 years old in a theater with my buddies. And when we went back to the car, we took a baseball bat out of the trunk before we opened the car doors. We were that terrified. So I kind of like that one. What about you?
I'm going to have to go with my old favorite, Event Horizon. Excellent way to build tension, some really disturbing energy, and the most horrifying thing of all, it's a gateway to get into Warhammer 40K, and anyone who's involved in that hobby knows how horrifyingly expensive it is. Thankfully, though, our news is not as horrifying. I'm going to go ahead and start off with a great story that we covered in the cold open. BMC announced plans to create two independent companies, BMC and BMC Helix. They're going to be accelerating growth to better serve customers. Now, the BMC side is going to be focused on their intelligent Z optimization and digital business automation units, while BMC Helix will drive innovation in digital service and operations management using, you guessed it, AI. The transition is going to be starting in early 2025, and that is going to be following BMC's strong track record of growth and market leadership. John, what do you think about BMC becoming two BMCs?
You know, you mentioned let's stay with the theme just for this segment at least. I think of kind of a two-headed monster, really, in a way. So when I first heard this news, I had a flashback to HP and when it split its company. And the motivation, like it always usually is with these things, is money, it's revenue, reinvigorating. I'm not saying a stale product line, but kind of reinvigorating a company along the lines, in this case, of the mainframe business and then the operations management. And you mentioned the two magic letters, AI. That is the core philosophy of one of the units. And I think it's something that's actually essential to BMC or any other company that wants to remain relevant right now. Now, I'm not going to take out my crystal ball and predict where BMC is going to go from here. I think it's encouraging, although early 2025 seems like a ways away. It really isn't. But I always dread two things with companies. When they have co-CEOs, which, by the way, almost never works, and when we have a company split in two. And I think that, to me, kind of raises alarms, especially when I look at a company like HP and where it is now. You know, kind of in the case of HP, is kind of a struggle or a race to the bottom, right? It gets smaller and smaller. BMC, I'm not sure. I'm going to be optimistic about this. I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt. I think that there is definitely an upside to what they want to do. I think it makes perfect sense. But I always shudder whenever I see a company do something like this. It always sets off alarms for me. The chief executive of an IT services company was indicted last week for duping the Security and Exchange Commission into believing his company's data center was certified at the highest rating level for reliability for managing sensitive government data. Justice Department officials contend Deepak Jain created a company in Maryland called Uptime Council to inspect and audit data centers for customers, including the SEC, that from 2012 through 2018 paid Jain's company approximately $10.7 million for the use of a data center in Beltsville, Maryland. Tom, there is a huge growth in industry and data centers. Should we be cautious, or should this be a cautionary tale about the creation of so many data centers and the desperation on the part of the government or other individuals or organizations to buy into a data center they may not know more about?
Absolutely. There's a couple things at play here. As we'll cover later, the amount of people that are utilizing data center space is just going through the roof right now. So everybody wants to know that they're using the best or they're using the most updated, or in the case of people who are dealing with data that really shouldn't get out, they want to make sure that it's the most stringent. And how do you trust that, right? Well, there's no consumer reports for data centers. You can't just go and look up in the list to see who does what. So that's effectively what this guy did is he created an independent commission that would certify these data centers to have the most stringent things. However, there are rules, and one of the rules says you can't double dip, right? If you are creating an independent commission that does something over here with the left hand, the right hand cannot be involved in that organization because, ladies and gentlemen, that is the worst 5-letter word you're ever going to hear. That's fraud because you are basically saying that I am certifying the data centers and I also have the most secure one over here. And if that's true, you have to draw a very clear line right down the middle and say that the people over here are not influenced by the people over here. And if that turns out to not to be the case, like it did here, the SEC is going to find the FBI and the DOJ, and it's OMG WTF. Because what's really going to happen is you're going to go to jail. I'm sorry I'm short circuiting the whole process here, but this is about as clear cut a case of fraud as you're going to be able to find. And unless they find some kind of weird technicality in this whole thing, he defrauded people millions of dollars. They're going to want their money back, and that's a fraud case. So this remains to be seen what happens because, of course, these are alleged crimes, and you are innocent until proven guilty. But if all of the evidence is, like it's listed here in the charging document and everything, if that comes out to be true, that's fraud, buddy. And the government is really good at punishing fraud with restitution and time in a nice federal facility somewhere where you get to think about why you shouldn't try to pull a fast one on the U.S. government. We talk a lot about AI here on the rundown, and Microsoft is no stranger to AI, but they're going to be jumping into the AI agent field in November with public agents for enterprises like McKinsey, bringing the largest software company into the agentic AI race. That means stiff competition for companies like Salesforce and ServiceNow. And we've been hearing a lot of advances about this agentic AI. So, John, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit, what is agentic AI and why is Microsoft jumping into the ring now?
Well, it's the latest craze, right? In terms of AI, you're going to have basically a number of AI agents, AI assistants, so be it, that are going to work and collaborate with one another. In a sense, they're going to create workforces. So this agentic AI will be kind of like a glorified low-level employee who does very basic, easy, repetitive work. And the idea is to free up the rest of your employees to do the stuff that really matters. Like for me, when I used to be a financial reporter, the thing that nobody wanted to do, ironically, was write earnings stories. And we almost wanted AI to come along to do that low level task so we could free up to interpret those results and then write about things down the road. So, in a sense, that's the idea. So, you create this kind of a smarter workforce by freeing your humans up. So, it was inevitable that Microsoft would get into this field. You know, Salesforce, ServiceNow, I believe SnapLogic just announced they were getting into the field. For the thing that's interesting with Microsoft is that they demonstrated something with McKinsey where they were evaluating an email where you could look at the summary of the email, the tone, phraseology, and determine who that email would go to and how that person would best act on it. So it's a very practical thing that's long-term consequences. Now, Salesforce kind of, in a sense, a couple months ago, pivoted their company on moving into this field of agentic AI. And they did so with NVIDIA as a partner. Again, who doesn't partner with NVIDIA? So Salesforce moved in with them. So did ServiceNow. They work with NVIDIA as well. And Microsoft is now into the fray. And this is, in a sense, competition for enterprise customers. It's something that Salesforce immediately tried to dispel. So I came across a story on CNBC, I believe, where from the announcement in London, they immediately got a response from Salesforce, kind of putting into question the reliability of the benchmarks, what Microsoft intends to do. To put it bluntly, Tom, Jensen at NVIDIA and Mark Benioff at Salesforce have put it really well. Agentic AI basically is like hiring a bunch of people for free. Now, I mean, that's a cautionary tale too, because if those people are especially good at what they do, that might be problems for the humans. So again, it's a race to see how many of these assistants we can sign on, and a lot of corporations are interested in this. And Microsoft, of course, given their clout in the industry and their applications, was bound to come in. They were making this available privately. Now it's all public. So the takeaway for me is Salesforce is really, really nervous about this. News broke last week that the Justice Department had taken down Anonymous Sudan, a pair of professional criminals that were selling their services. Their particular specialization was using DDoS attacks to take down sites on demand for as little as $100 per day. One of the major contributors to the arrest of Anonymous Sudan was AWS. Tom School, distinguished engineer, started detecting traffic back in June of 2023 and used internal AWS tools to identify the proxy servers used by the group so they could be identified as soon as a new one popped up. Tom, this is kind of interesting. Talk about bedfellows, strange bedfellows. We have Amazon working with the Justice Department, which, as well as the FTC, is looking into Amazon's business practices. But I guess for the common good, they did something well. Their enemy of their enemy is their friend, I guess.
Well, the thing here is, absent any other investigations that are going on into Amazon, there's still people who are utilizing Amazon services to break the law. And I know that we kind of get into this weird common carrier kind of thing, but when you pop up on Amazon's radar as using too much bandwidth, you done got a problem, Jack. And so basically what happened is that Tom went into this whole thing and he's like, we are seeing weird like traffic spikes and patterns. And remind you, this happened in June of 2023. This was back before Anonymous Sudan was really like using their platform to like make this a big deal. They were kind of like they would pop up and they would attack somebody and then they'd immediately disappear. So they were seeing these really weird spike patterns. And they knew that it was a DDoS attack because it was an amplification for, an hour or two and then gone like the wind. So what they did is they used their internal security tooling to track back to these proxy servers, because pumping this much traffic through Amazon is not only expensive, but it gets you on the radar of some really smart people. What Anonymous Sudan and other companies that do this are actually looking for is they're looking for these regional ISPs with terrible security practices, and they're using Amazon's servers as a proxy relay to amplify through all of those other systems. So what Amazon basically did was said, we're going to be able to identify when these proxy servers pop up so that we can notify the people who the proxy servers are communicating with so that they can lock these things down. And on one hand, they're telling people, hey, you're about to be hacked. And on the other hand, they're like, hello, FBI, boy, have we got one for you. And so anybody who thinks that these processes take a long time and you're like, oh my God, why can't they just catch them? There's this little thing called evidence that you have to collect. You have to catch people in the act of doing things. You have to be able to tie it to them. And when you can do that, then you have a case. And then you wait and you make sure that you're going to get them. And it's like, those scenes where like everybody shows up at the house at once and there's a raid and they handcuff the person. So you can't just do that with like 2 days of notice. That takes time. So you figure that they've been collecting this information for over a year, and they've got an open and shut case against these two, hackers. And what they're going to do is they're going to prosecute them, just like we mentioned in the story above. The thing that the DOJ has to understand is that these kinds of attacks are not going to go away anytime soon, and that they need better tooling to be able to detect and collect evidence. Maybe what they should be doing is working with companies like Amazon to be able to detect these kinds of things. And like you mentioned, John, that's a double-edged sword for Amazon, because if they develop the tooling that allows law enforcement to better investigate these issues, it could also mean that law enforcement's going to take a closer look at how they can do that kind of thing. So I guess the question is, do you want Amazon to break some rules, or do you want to let the internet run lawless? I really wish I had a better answer for you right now. Right. Perplexity AI was sued by News Corp this week, and that follows the fact that the New York Times did it the week before, for allegedly scraping their news content and using it in their AI models. These intellectual property lawsuits underscore the tensions between news organizations and media outlets and companies like Perplexity, who are leveraging freely available information on the internet whether or not it's marked as not being able to be used by AI crawlers. John, do you think that Perplexity was kind of bending the rules quite a bit, or should news companies just give up on the fact that AI is going to be crawling everything they own?
Yeah, Perplexity is, they've tried to work with the media. They've had some partnerships to try to gloss over this issue, but it's continuing to bite them. At one point, they actually were working with News Corp. So in a sense, it's kind of the scraping facility has kind of gotten ahead of the skis. And there was actually an interesting data study that was done of Perplexity scraping a Forbes story, and almost 10% of the story they scraped was outright plagiarized. So that's something, an issue with the technology, but it's also an issue with companies that are just trying to protect their turf. And the New York Times has been particularly stringent about that. You know, they have their suit against OpenAI. They're they're trying to protect their content, especially now. Um, I think we're going to see more of this. It's going to continue to happen. The technology is not quite refined. Plus, news organizations now have never been more vigilant about protecting their content. And we just have these two trains heading towards one another. I don't see how this issue is going to be resolved. I think we're going to probably see some sort of ruling or maybe even some sort of settlement. And based upon that settlement, maybe it provides a groundwork or a blueprint for going forward. But this is just a persistent problem that we're going to have in the news content slash AI age. Sophos has announced they are acquiring XDR vendor Secureworks. The deal, valued at $859 million dollars or $850 per share, is an all-cash transaction expected to close in early 2025. Sophos said they are looking to expand their offerings around XDR and provide solutions of different organization sizes, from enterprise to small business. Secureworks has been acquired by DEC in 2011 and had an IPO in 2015. Dell had been looking to sell Secureworks as early as 2019, had engaged with investment bankers to explore sale and takeover options for Secureworks. So the wayward Secureworks has now moved on to be bought by Sophos. Maybe you can kind of untangle this yarn for us, Tom.
So on the one hand, I think that Sophos really did need some XDR software. Everybody is going to have it now because there's more to endpoint security than just detecting malware. There's all of these other things, picking up incidental traces, lateral movement, that kind of stuff. Bravo to Sophos for looking out there. I think the more interesting part of the story is the fact that Secureworks is being offered up on a silver platter, for lack of a better term. Um, we know that Dell's been trying to sell them for a while, like 5 years, because, well, Dell still has that giant debt that they have to pay off for buying EMC. They've been trying to part and parcel the pieces that they don't necessarily need, that are not core to their function, out to the rest of the world. And the problem that Secureworks had is not that it wasn't effective. It was. It's that it was just as effective as everybody else in that market. According to the reports that I was reading doing research for this story, I mean, they actually, they were kind of in the middle of the pack. They lost a little bit of revenue in the last quarter, which means that they're kind of seen as equivalent, right? Like, if it's going to cost me the same amount of money or the same amount of effort to do two different solutions, what are my other things? Well, maybe this one gives me a little bit better deal this time. Maybe this one's a little bit more integrated with the company that I'm doing business with on this other side. It's the worst thing in the world, right? Is, Nikes are Reeboks are Adidas. It's a shoe. I don't care. There's no differentiation. Now, the hope is that when Sophos is able to rebrand this and kind of integrate it into what they're doing with their endpoint security, that it will make it a little bit stickier, so that people will just say, oh, well, since I'm already using Sophos for my endpoint security or my, enterprise security assets, then I'm going to go ahead and move into the XDR phase, and that's just pure profit for them. I hope that Dell enjoys the $859 million that they got. I'm sure that is basically the interest payment on a bond or something that's coming due pretty soon, to get rid of the whole debt thing that they still owe. I don't think this is going to be the last time we're going to see something like this happen. I just hope that ultimately this is a good win for both sides of the equation. Dell offloads a company that isn't really core to the business that they're doing right now, and Sophos gets a company that is core to the business they need to be in. All right, John. As I mentioned at the top of the show, OCP Summit happened last week, and there was a lot of news that was coming out. Some trends that were going on in the market, some of the larger things that we're seeing. And I figured it might be nice to kind of sit down and maybe take a closer look at some of those. One of the ones that really stood out to me, and it came courtesy of a news release from ARM, is that global data center energy consumption is expected to triple by 2030. So in just 5 short years, data center output power wise is going to be triple what it is today, which kind of tracks to some of the news stories that we've been reporting on the rundown, where we're seeing companies like Microsoft and Amazon investing in small scale nuclear reactors. We're hearing that a lot of companies that are trying to say, we know, remember how we said we're going to be green and carbon neutral? Yeah, that's right out the window. Are we reaching a pace where this is unsustainable?
Yes, I think you're right. There's a major contradiction going on, right? In their pursuit of AI, these companies are going to be burning more energy than ever. And the one company in particular that stands out to me as one that's kind of caught in the crosshairs is NVIDIA. And in fact, I'll let you in on something. I don't know if it's become public yet, but NVIDIA is working on a new corporate blog. And within that corporate blog, they're going to talk about how they are socially conscious, or some of the things they're doing that are for good for society. And I think they're trying to get ahead of this problem because, in a sense, they will be as guilty as anybody for churning through energy. And that's, as you mentioned, an impetus for this interest among, let's say, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, in SMRs and in nuclear plants in particular, 3 Mile Island of all places. This is going to only accelerate because they need to find other sources of renewable energy that is somewhat clean.
One of the things that I think about when we come to this power situation in the data center is that it's unsustainable, but not for the reasons that everybody's thinking. The world's going to be able to come up with more power generation. Like, we know that if we have to turn on a couple more nuclear reactors to get that power back, great. If that means that we can actually do more research into fusion power, even better. Do you know why it's unsustainable? Because I have this tiny little needle that's going to pop that AI bubble pretty soon. And then all of that data center power generation that people are building up for is going to disappear. Yeah, I know that if you read any analyst report out there, AI is not going away. See also blockchain, see also software defined networking, see also .com. Do I need to keep going? Because that's 25 years worth of, oh my God, this is the best thing ever and it's completely sustainable forever. No, it's not. And that's the thing that people need to understand. Granted, we are going to have to ramp up this power. And like my friends over at the Packet Pushers said, these are the kinds of projects that take years to bring online. So all of the efforts that they're doing now to meet this growing demand, they have to start them now because they won't be ready in 5 years if we don't. So I feel like this is a reaction, and it's a positive reaction to what we're seeing in the industry, because everyone's like, well, why didn't we just start building out this stuff 3 years ago? Well, 3 years ago, OpenAI existed, but nobody knew who they were. And the real issue that we were running into was the fact that we needed to be able to power cloud data centers, not AI data centers. So I think that we're moving as quickly as we can, where the timelines on these projects are different. But don't be surprised if in 2028 or 2029, either the power consumption goes down significantly because we figured out how to make them more efficient, or maybe we don't need to get so totally crazy about that. Because one of the other things that you have to deal with is the fact that we're constantly improving the way that we do chipsets. And one of the things that came out from ARM is the insane amount of resource cost that it takes to miniaturize chipsets. Now, as everybody knows, the processes that make the chipsets are referred to by them the nanometer size of the components on the die. And so, some of the older chipsets are like in the dozens of nanometers. We're slowly kind of moving down. The current cutting edge technology, if you want to call it that, is 3 nanometer process. That's probably what your newest iPhone is running on, is a 3 nanometer. Going down to a 2 nanometer process is the next big jump. But according to the people at ARM, the design costs to move from a 3 nanometer process to a 2 nanometer process could top $725 million in order to be able to do that the way that we want to do that. So, in addition to the fact that we're paying a buttload of money for power, we're also worried about the fact that moving these processes down into smaller and smaller scales is going to cost, at this point, honestly, billions of dollars. I have to go back to the sustainability argument, John. Is being able to spend this much money to make things a little faster and a little smaller really sustainable?
Yeah, that's the big question. And you mentioned this timeline. And for me, that's what it all comes down to is when does the bubble pop and when do all these companies that do exist now or are about to be launched go away by the wayside? Um, you can hear anything from 2 years to 5 years to even 7 years. So you have to balance the idea of what your needs are, what your budget is versus your own survivability. So I think, as you said, this will be mitigated somewhat by fallouts, and it won't be as crucial an issue, perhaps. And ironically, it won't be as crucial an issue because companies are going to fail.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat that you are, John. I agree that we need to keep making things faster and faster, but much like Moore's law, we're going to hit a limit. Like there's only so much smaller that we can make these chips before we're going to waste so much material getting it working that we are basically cutting off our nose to spite our face. And everybody wants slightly smaller things, mostly. But as you've seen in the response to a lot of the new, consumer technology, there is a size limit. The iPhone Mini kind of flopped because nobody wanted it to be small. They wanted it to be the right size. It's Goldilocks, right? Too big, too small, just right. Um, but that also means that you're having to do other crazy things, like you have to miniaturize the chips. Why? Because you have to make the battery bigger. Because it turns out that people are spending more and more time on their devices. So you do have to fight these miniaturization battles. The problem is that you have to do so much other stuff to the facilities in order to be able to hit these targets that it is crazy. For example, did you know that you have to shock isolate these buildings in order to get high yields? Because traffic driving by on the road outside the facility can cause enough vibrations to ruin yields. It's one of the reasons why there's usually like a half a mile or more between the actual building itself and the main highways, is because they are so sensitive to these kinds of issues that they have to plan ahead. And that's part of what the $725 million is going into, is figuring out how to build these facilities. And you want to try to build them in places that have earthquakes? Good luck. One of the other problems that you get when you miniaturize stuff that much is heat. And as everyone who took elementary physics knows, energy that isn't consumed is converted to heat. Also, ask anybody who's ever tried to overclock their PC and turned it into a very effective toaster oven. So one of the things that was really hot at OCP, pun fully intended, was the use of liquid cooling for devices. Now we've seen it kind of in the hobbyist scene, where instead of putting a big copper heatsink on top of your CPU, you circulate some kind of a cooling fluid, much like your air conditioner in your house, in order to keep things cool. But we're starting to see like rack scale liquid cooling solutions, or in some cases, as I saw from some of our great field day delegates that were there, the possibility of doing immersion cooling on some of these devices. So, John, is liquid cooling the future, or are we going to have to worry about bailing out our data centers with a mop and bucket?
I think you are dead on, Tom. It is in our future. I don't think we have much of a choice at this time, this point. The thing that really strikes me about, just in a larger sense, about what's going on in the tech industry right now is that we have so much hype, yet we have so much impatience, especially impatience among the investors and the C-suite. They want results now. They want to hurry up. They want to hurry up, but we have to sometimes wait and put in place some guardrails, literally guardrails, not just against digital enemies or attacks, but guardrails that apply to things like, I don't know, nuclear reactor, where human lives are at stake. I don't mean to be too cryptic. I don't want to go 3 Mile Island on you or China syndrome on you, but these are things that we have to consider. I mean, in a sense, we've escalated things to the point where we have to seriously consider all these options. We don't know when this market's going to take off, when it's going to crash. Who knows?
Well, I hope it doesn't crash like a giant tidal wave because that would be awkward. But this is a problem we've known about for a very long time. And this kind of goes back to that whole we can only make things so small. Eventually we're going to hit a limit where the things that we're doing are incapable of bleeding that heat. Heat is the enemy of everything. And I referenced Warhammer 40K in the opening, but anybody who's ever played BattleTech knows that you need more heat sinks on your mech if you're going to use the really cool stuff, right? Well, you can only sink so much heat. And the other problem is that in a lot of cases that passive cooling capability just sits there if you're not using it, right? How often does your air conditioner run versus not run? Most people would say you don't want it to run constantly, but when you think about the way that these cooling systems work, you don't want them to run constantly. You want them to run at a high efficiency level, right? And so I can see this being a big boon for people. But the flip side of that is that we need to use more efficient technologies to build the servers in the first place. That's why things like silicon photonics are more exciting to me. Yeah, the stopgap right now is to put liquid cooling in a server because silicon photonics is still a couple of years away, if not more than that, in order at the scales that we need it. But eventually, the way to make this whole problem go away is not to continue to rely on copper, which is a really good conductor of electricity and a really good producer of heat. It's to create systems that don't generate as much heat in the first place. And I think that that's one of the lessons that we can learn from OCP. Power costs are always going to go up, chip sizes are always going to go down, and no matter what, they're always going to produce byproducts that we don't want. So we need to figure out how we can build better systems. And maybe the answer isn't to just chase the almighty dollar, but to figure out what's going on that we need to be better about. We need to make these things more responsible. And I hope that some people are paying attention to that. Well, thank you very much for tuning into the rundown this week. We have a lot of events coming up in the next 6 weeks or so that you're definitely going to want to pay attention to. Right now, going on at techfieldday.com is Cloud Field Day 21. Stephen Foskett is talking to companies like Cumulo, VMware, and Platform 9. You're going to want to tune in at techfieldday.com to see some of the neat stuff that they're coming up with, including delegate roundtables and Ignite talks. I'm going to be back in a couple of weeks at Networking Field Day. We're going to be hearing from companies like Arista, Itential, Meter, Elicity, Aviz, and Path Solutions. That's going to be a big event for me. And then the next week, we are going to be doing App Dev Field Day 2 on location. Stay tuned for more details on that at techfieldday.com. Then I'm going to be back with Mobility Field Day 12 to round out our year. We've got a couple of exciting presenters lined up. We'll be adding more to the website very soon. And then you need to check out techfieldday.com to see the lineup of presenters for 2025, because we're already starting to list our events for the first quarter of next year. And we're already going to be kicking off with another AI Field Day. AI Field Day 6 will be at the end of January, and there's more great stuff to come. And we want to see what you have to say about it. So make sure you go to techfieldday.com to see our future lineup. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in for this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Remember that you can catch the newest episode every Wednesday by going to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Gestalt IT video. You can also follow along in your favorite podcast application of choice. And if you do that, please leave us a rating and a review and let people know where they can subscribe, because we always love more viewers. You can also check us out at the other properties that we are a part of, which would be TechStrong TV and the Futurum Group. We'll be back next Wednesday to talk about more tech news. Until then, make sure that you are staying safe and enjoy the spooky season while it lasts. We'll be back with more wonderfully spooky news next week.